Spectra Talk Show. I'm here with Sajit Green, evolutionary astrologer and soul guidance coach. Today on the Spiritual Spectra Talk Show, we're talking about Mercury in retrograde. Mercury in retrograde challenges you during a 2-week period of time, a few times a year, and Sajit will tell us all about it. If in the last couple of weeks you've noticed some problems with your technology, emails going missing, or miscommunication, that's Mercury retrograde having its effects on you. So we'll turn to Shazit and have her tell us a little bit about how Mercury retrograde affects all of us. Welcome, Shazit.
Hi, Jennifer. Thanks for having me again. And so first I'd like to just say a little bit about what the planet Mercury is about in terms of in astrology. And Mercury is the planet that has to do with our minds, how we think, how we communicate. It also is associated with how technology is running, whether it's running smoothly or not, travel plans, transportation, schedules. All of those kinds of things are affected by the planet Mercury. And for people who might watch the show today, which is today's February 10th, 2015, you might wonder, why are we talking about Mercury retrograde? Because today's the day that it starts to move forward. But the reason why we are talking about it today is that when Mercury starts to go forward, it doesn't go forward like it doesn't stop on a dime and then suddenly move forward. It actually comes to what we call a station, which is like a stopping point or sort of a pause point. So it actually takes a couple of days before we're really fully out of that Mercury retrograde energy and things are really moving forward again. And also, I wish it was true that Mercury only goes retrograde for 2 weeks, Jennifer, but actually 3 times a year it goes retrograde for 3 weeks.
Oops,
so
sorry.
That's okay. I think it actually was sort of made it easy to really make that point that it's 3 weeks, and it happens 3 times a year, and it really is a time that calls for a lot of patience because things are kind of out of whack and not moving forward very well. And so for those of us who are watching the show today on the day that Mercury supposedly goes forward, just realize that it's actually stationing or pausing would be another way to say it today, and that at those points when it's stopping or pausing in the sky is when we actually can feel the effects most strongly. So like for us, Jennifer, trying to get the show off the ground today, we had a couple of false starts, we had a lot of technological difficulties. Third time is a charm, hopefully. So today we're still really feeling the effects of Mercury retrograde today. And so don't get too frustrated, be patient, and know that the forward movement, getting things going forward again, really comes into play more in the next few days. And even we're really fully out of the retrograde after March 5th. So we still have a bit of time that we may be kind of going back and reviewing or going back over the territory that Mercury was going over.
Okay, so tell our listeners out there, what effects does Mercury retrograde have on us? Like, for example, people, you talk about Mercury retrograde, but how does someone know that it's affecting them? So give some ideas of things that might be happening in their lives that Mercury might have to deal with.
Sure. And so it does affect different people differently. It depends what part of your chart it's moving through in its retrograde motion. It also depends on how Mercury is in your own birth chart, which gives you your own particular relationship to the planet Mercury. So for example, people who have a lot of Gemini in their charts, or maybe their sun sign is Gemini, they tend to experience Mercury retrograde even more strongly than some of the rest of us because they're very attuned to the planet Mercury. So some of the signs that you are being affected by Mercury when it's in retrograde are that you might notice that a lot of things are needing to get rescheduled, which is something that happens for me a lot. Having my own practice where I set my own schedule. It's not like I go to work every day to a certain office and it's 9 to 5. I have my own schedule, which changes from week to week. So during Mercury retrograde periods, I notice that there's a lot of rescheduling that happens. If you've got travel plans, sometimes, the plane might get delayed or the flight gets canceled. There can be miscommunications between people, not from any kind of ill will, but just that people don't necessarily really hear each other correctly. So especially if the communication is through something like email or texts, which are very open to misinterpretation, it's really important that you check and make sure that people are really understanding what you're really trying to say, and not get just like, upset because like this person, isn't really understanding me, or that their response isn't, doesn't make sense. So it really does call for a lot of patience and really good communication skills. And I'm curious for you, Jennifer, have you been noticing it in the past 3 weeks how it's affecting you?
Actually, it's been affecting me really the past week, more so than the previous two. I'm not sure why now, but I had scheduled an appointment with a client for Saturday, and then I emailed him to confirm, but he never confirmed. And so the day of, I still didn't even know if we were having the appointment. So I emailed him again, and he's like, "Oh, I didn't know I had to reply." And I'm like, "Okay." So I was just like, "Okay, let it go. It's Mercury in retrograde,"
Yeah.
And so I just I just nicely told him, "Well, it's too late now, so let's go ahead and reschedule. And yes, you do need to confirm, you
Yeah.
know." And then I have somebody else who I emailed, and apparently this person sent me emails, responded. I never got them. I recently joined a group. I went to their website and clicked on invite to send an email, and then another functionality also says send an email, neither of which worked. And in fact, at one point, I checked the website, and the website was down. So, yeah, this past week, email especially, and anything kind of web-related has been kind of wonky for me. The previous 2 weeks, not as much, really. The only thing that I had the last 2 weeks was my netbook refuses to work. Like I can turn it on, but when I click on the internet will work for a little bit, and then suddenly my whole computer will just freeze.
Wow.
And so I had hired an intern, and she was supposed to be working on this. And it's been frustrating because she can't work on it because each time it glitches. And it's more than once in the past few weeks.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, oh my gosh. She had to bring her own laptop, and so much time delayed because she couldn't get anything done. So yeah, that's the one thing the past couple of weeks has been really annoying. But this past week, email and website glitches galore. I think maybe because, like you said, it's transitioning, so it's kind of maybe at the height of its power and then leaving or something. I don't know. Maybe that's just how it affects me personally. Like you said, maybe it's something in my chart.
Yeah, it might be about how it interacts with your chart. Yeah. The other thing I think would be important to talk about is the upside of Mercury retrograde, because people tend to have this really negative association and maybe like fear and anxiety, and like, oh my God, Mercury's going retrograde. And so yes, Mercury retrograde can interfere or kind of play tricks on us with our technology and communications and plans. And what it's really helpful for is anything that has the letters RE in front of it, like review, revise, research, reconsider, renegotiate, review, repair. Sometimes things that maybe have been broken or lost even before the Mercury retrograde, you can go back and find things. When Mercury goes retrograde, sometimes you go back and you find things that you had lost, or you finally get something repaired that's been broken for a long time. Or maybe it was broken but you didn't quite realize, and Mercury retrograde will bring those things to light about what needs to be repaired. The other thing I want to mention that people sometimes get really kind of have a lot of fear around Mercury retrograde is if they've heard the idea that you should not sign contracts during Mercury retrograde. But sometimes we really don't have a choice. There's something that's going on that we have to sign at that time. And so don't get too worried just make sure that you read the contract really carefully, that you truly are both on the same page. The two parties who are agreeing to the contract both need to really make sure they really understand the terms of the contract, and so that there are no miscommunications or surprises later on down the line.
That's definitely good advice. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I joined a group, and that required me to sign a contract. And luckily, I wasn't even thinking of Mercury Retrograde. I was just so excited, and I filled it out, and I joined. And actually, it's been a great group so far. So the only glitches that I've had with it is the website glitches with that organization. But contract-wise, that part is good. It's just the website's been kind of that's the website that's been kind of glitchy. But at least the rest of it has been going. At least person-to-person part has been going well. Yeah. And in fact, communication between me and them actually, I should knock on wood, but actually has been going very well. And so it just goes to show that sometimes Mercury retrograde will affect you in some ways, but not in others, that other people say, oh, it's going to affect this, and maybe not, and maybe that won't have the effect on you. You never know. So it's good to be cautious, but not neurotic.
Exactly. Yeah. Cautious and being discerning and very detail oriented. Tracking all the details and making sure that you really understand things. And then the things that do happen that are out of your control, it's just like, God grant me the serenity to deal with these things that are changing that I don't have any control over. And then in terms of Mercury going forward again, which again we'll start to feel that more forward momentum more a couple of days, more so than today, is that the things that we have been reconsidering or reviewing or revising or researching or contemplating during the retrograde period, now is when we can start to move forward with those plans or the revisions, or maybe the research we've been doing Mercury retrograde has given us all the information that we need to now make a good decision about something. So the things that have been in review during the retrograde period, now we can start to put those plans into effect or start to move forward again. And because this is happening at the beginning of the year, it's kind of like we get take two with starting the new year over again. It's like we started into the new year on January 1st, then Mercury went retrograde on January 20th. So we've been in retrograde from January 20th, 2015 till today, February 10th, 2015. So kind of it may have given a slower start to the new year, or things that we might have thought we were going to really get going great guns on in the beginning of the year. Maybe that didn't really happen. So now it's time kind of we get to start over again.
So would you say that now is a good time to recommit to your New Year's resolutions and plans for the year?
Definitely. And maybe during the retrograde period you need to revise some things. Maybe you realize that, realize, maybe you've realized that some of those intentions weren't really quite aligned, with what you really want to do, or that you didn't quite have enough, information or resources to really do those things yet. So maybe you had to kind of revision or get a new vision of what those New Year's resolutions and intentions are, and now you can move forward with a lot more clarity about that.
So
or another thing is, go ahead.
I said, so perhaps they need to be more realistic and
realistic. Yes.
More practical rather than idealistic view, and maybe even narrow it down, because people, for example, one of the most common resolutions is to lose weight, but maybe make it about concrete plans and say, well, in so many months I'll lose 10 pounds, in 6 months I'll lose 10 pounds, or maybe make it something that's feasible for that person's weight and height and lifestyle, but be a little bit more concrete in terms of their planning and strategy.
Yes, and that thing about weight loss is a really good example. In fact, I have 2 clients right now who I'm working with, coaching clients, And part of what they're working on is their relationship with their body, their relationship with food, and wanting to have, a better relationship with their body and food, and also wanting to lose weight. And both of them had started off the new year really, with this gung-ho idea of losing weight. And what they've realized during the Mercury retrograde period was that they're in a time right now in their lives where there's a lot of stressors on them. And it's not really the ideal time to try to change their eating habits right now. And so what they've decided to focus on instead, as kind of their first step, is really working on the emotional piece and the things that relate to their soul work and why they have these difficult relationships with their body and with food or with sexuality, and work on the more emotional psychological side. And then later on in the year, when they're not in such a time of stress, that they could start to work on the food, changing their relationship to how they're eating.
That's great. One of the things I noticed this week, I was watching someone's video, and they talked about New Year's goals for their business. And I had a few goals that I'd set, but they were very broad. And so as I was, watching the video, as soon as the video finished, I immediately just started to type a comment. And the goals just started to just come out of me, like very specific goals and things that I wanted to focus on. Originally my goals were, I wanted to network more, and the other goal was I wanted to grow my business. I wanted more clients. Well, that's very broad. And then as I was watching this video, it just clicked, and I just, and this was just yesterday, so maybe it's that Mercury beginning to go direct a little bit that inspired me. And I was able to say, well, I want to go to 2 networking events a week rather than just say I want to do more. And I specified specific services that I really wanted to target and that I really wanted to gain clientele. And I put it out there on the comments, And so, I feel like I'm beginning to re-envision here in a different way, instead of being, really broad about my business goals, having something more specific. So for business owners, this might be a good time and look at the last few weeks and think, okay, well, maybe you have this broad idea of what you wanted to do for the year, but now is the time to really hone in on the specifics and also on how to achieve them.
Yes, that's great advice. Another example I have is that Mercury retrograde has been retrograde in the sign of Aquarius, and Aquarius is a lot about kind of like getting inspiration and insights and kind of like that lightning bolt or the light bulb over your head kind of thing. And so I did have one of those light bulbs over the head thing that happened about a week ago, which actually is kind of a secret, so I'm not going to disclose the details yet. But because that inspiration came to me during Mercury retrograde, I feel like now as Mercury starts to move forward, I also need to get really realistic about, like, is this inspiration, is this idea something that I can truly manifest? Or maybe I have to modify the idea somewhat. I feel like I need to do a little bit more research and talk to some experts in this area of this particular insight and inspiration. So I'm not going to just go charging full speed ahead on that insight or inspiration I got. I feel like I need to really be very realistic with it and see, okay, what do I need to be able to move forward with this?
So that's good. So it's not about saying Mercury is going direct now, so go ahead, just move forward, move with your life, and without really, just charging forward without really any plans. It's about moving forward in a very systematic kind of way, and thinking about it rather than just moving forward. And because I think once we're in retrograde, we kind of feel bogged down by the quirky things that are happening, and we're just ready to move forward. And so, like you said, someone might be a little impetuous and something that maybe they should need to think about just a little bit longer.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, here's another example is that I decided to work on my taxes really early this year instead of wait till close to the deadline. So I pretty
Good for
much have
you.
my taxes done, but I did it during retrograde period. So
Ooh.
I feel a little bit cautious, like I didn't want to like actually, turn in the taxes during Mercury retrograde. I'm going to wait till Mercury's going forward a little bit. I'm going to review my information one more time just to make sure I didn't, make any errors during Mercury retrograde. And then I'll submit it once I've reviewed it again.
Oh, that's definitely smart. You don't want to make mistakes on your taxes.
Yeah.
Definitely not. Definitely not. Now, one of
You
the
know, when
things that we touched on earlier was about communication issues. So tell me a little bit more on, because that really affects relationships. I mean, for those that
Sure.
are out there that may not even know what Mercury retrograde is and how it's affecting them, you know,
Mhm.
um, you know, you might get into conflicts during this time period because of
Yeah.
miscommunication. So, talk a little bit about that.
So yeah, definitely conflicts can arise during Mercury retrograde because of the miscommunication. There's one story I heard of a friend of mine whose friend almost got fired during Mercury retrograde because of something she said, and her boss misinterpreted it. And so my friend told the boss, my friend is also friends of the boss, and told the boss about Mercury retrograde, and then the boss was able to kind of take a breath and realize that it had been a miscommunication, and the person ended up not getting fired. But you never know, what kinds of things might be miscommunicated, and so um, there's something called like reflective listening, where when one person says something, the other person says, "So what I heard you saying was blah blah blah," and that can seem really stilted, like as a communication strategy. A lot of times people feel like it just doesn't feel natural, but I think it's a really good strategy when Mercury's retrograde to just check things out and be like, okay, so I just want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly, and it sounded to me like you were saying that blah blah blah, and is that really what you were saying? And I found that that works really well. I do that a lot with my clients because as a coach, it's really important that I really get what people are saying and not just be like, uh-huh, uh-huh. So I do that kind of checking things out all the time with my clients, but especially during Mercury retrograde, I really check out with people, am I hearing what they're saying? And are they hearing what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, I definitely use that same technique with my clients, especially the ones where I'm especially not clear on what they're saying. And so I want to make sure to say it back and say, well, did I understand that correctly? You know,
Yeah.
and how do you understand, what I said to you? I
Yeah.
think it's important. But yes, in regular communication, just day to day, that might, like you said, feel a little stilted. But maybe during this time period, it would be good to definitely include that, or at least, like for example, your friend that almost got fired. Let's say she said the statement, it came out, and then at that point, maybe stop back and say her boss might have. If the boss had known about Mercury retrograde, could have said, "Wait a minute, this is what you said. Is that what you really meant to say?"
Uh-huh.
Um, and thankfully for your friend, the boss found out later at least. But that's something that if you slip up and you let something slip, and then then at that point maybe even if you don't do it not on the front end, but at least on the back end, at least
Yeah.
reiterate communication. Any other advice on that?
Well, that made me think of another example that happened for me just this morning, which is that I meant to send an email to person A, but by mistake I sent it to person B. And fortunately, there was nothing in it, that was offensive to the person I sent it to, and it all worked out fine. But I had to go back and tell, the person, oh, you know what, I'm sorry, this email really wasn't meant to go to you. It was meant to go to the other person. And so I had to kind of go back and correct, that error in the communication. And I think it's so easy to do with email sometimes, to send things to the wrong person, or um, so we can kind of go back and hopefully repair the communication if it wasn't done in the best way. And also about, in regular communication with people, doing this kind of checking out, like, I thought I heard you saying this, is this what you were saying? Even though it might not feel like it's the most natural thing, what I find is that people really appreciate it because people really do want to be heard. And so then they realize, that you really do care about them and about the communication if you're willing to go that extra mile to really ask, like, okay, is this really what you were saying?
Definitely, definitely.
I think it's a helpful time and a helpful tool in communication, even when Mercury is going direct, to check out with people if we're getting them correctly.
So we talked about technology issues, communication issues, but there was one other that you mentioned that's impacted by Mercury retrograde, and that's travel. So
Yes.
I don't think you would say don't travel at all, but is there something in terms of guidelines that someone might consider with regards to travel?
Yes. So one thing is about like just double checking, like if you've made reservations in advance for something and the travel occurs during Mercury retrograde, you want to just really double check, all the information, because maybe you made a mistake and you entered, the wrong date when you, went online to schedule, to get a ticket, an airfare. So just to be really diligent, be very detail oriented, and review what you've done, review the plans. If the plans have to do with another person, to really talk to the other person and make sure, okay, so let's make sure we're on the same page. You're going to pick me up at the airport at noon. So the communication, the person-to-person communication can come into play when it comes to travel plans as well. And then sometimes there's just things that happen beyond our control, like the flight gets delayed or canceled, bad weather happens. And again, when those things happen that are just completely out of our control, all we can do is let go and maybe laugh and say, okay, Mercury's retrograde. Just be more flexible and more patient when you're traveling under Mercury retrograde.
And this time of year, I think that's really good advice because we definitely have weather impact that to change our travel plans during this time of year. So I think a little added dose of patience.
Yes. And then things like, there could be lost baggage issues, and so make sure, you don't put your car keys in the suitcase that's in the checked baggage, or things that you really need immediately. Make sure that, you've got those in your carry-on with you. So just being more mindful, I'll say, rather than cautious, just being more mindful and really checking all the details more than once. Or another example might be like maybe you scheduled all the travel plans, bought your tickets and talked to your, people who are picking up the airport. Maybe you did all of that during retrograde, but the actual travel happens after the retrograde. You still want to go back and make sure that all those plans that you made during the retrograde period, that all the details are correct.
And so now, as we begin to move forward with Mercury going direct, is there any advice that you have? You mentioned that it's not until March that we actually get out of Mercury retrograde altogether. But as we move forward in this time period before it passes, is there any advice that you would give us?
I really think that I've covered that in terms of, making sure that things that you did during the retrograde period, that it's really what you want for moving forward, that you've got all the details have been done correctly, or that your vision is what you really want to do. And the thing about that March 5th date is, let me see if I can describe this, even though I can't like draw you a picture, but let me see if I can paint a picture in our minds, which is, this is sort of a metaphor for what the planet Mercury does in its retrograde process and then its moving forward process, is imagine that you're on a really long hike and you've already hiked like a full mile, but then you realize that you dropped your hat somewhere back on the trail. So you're going to have to retrace your steps. So you stop at that, you've gone 1 mile, and then you stop at that 1 mile point, and say you retrace your steps and you go back a half a mile to where you dropped your hat. That's the retrograde process, when Mercury is going backwards across territory that it's already been through in your chart or in the sky. So it goes back, and that's why you can retrieve things that have been lost under Mercury retrograde, because Mercury is going back and retracing its steps. Then when Mercury goes direct, then you're starting to move forward again on that same trail that you went backwards half a mile on. Now you're starting to move forward. But when you first start to move forward, you're still covering the same old ground, right?
Right.
Because you went backwards a half a mile, and now you've got to go forward another whole half a mile till you get to where you start going backwards. So it's really, you go over that same territory 3 times. You go over it 1 time when you're going forward, that first mile. You go across it backwards during the retrograde period, and then you trace that through that same territory a 3rd time in that going forward part. So what that March 5th date is about is that March 5th is when we get to the point that we had left off and really start moving forward into the new territory. So all of this back and forth movement is all in the same territory. So we get a really good long time to really go over things again and review things and reconsider and revision. So between now and March 5th, we kind of still have time to maybe do more research or more revisions, or really think things through very clearly while Mercury's going forward but hasn't gone into the new territory yet. Did that make sense?
Oh yeah, I love that example. Yeah, I would say that that description makes me really view Mercury retrograde in a more positive light, because I feel like retracing your steps 3 times, really you get to a really thorough look at something. And so I think the positive side of Mercury retrograde is really reanalyzing something and looking at it again. And I can say, from someone who is a writer, I love to write, but I usually will start a project and then leave it be for a few weeks and then come back to it, leave it be again, and then come back to it. And I do that specifically that way because each time I see it with new eyes, and I'm able to really re-envision it in a new way. And so maybe that's the advantage of Mercury retrograde, is that maybe all these glitches and these challenges are causing us to pause and to really look at what it is we're really saying, what we're communicating, and how we're communicating. Maybe that's the positive side of Mercury retrograde.
Yes, definitely, yeah. And it definitely does relate to writing, because the planet Mercury has to do with your mind and how you think and how you communicate, and writing is one form of communication. So this process of, writing something, reviewing it, revising it, that's definitely, something that Mercury is very supportive of, that process. And the other reason I like that analogy about the hiking is that I am a hiker, so that kind of analogy comes to me pretty quickly. And when you hike the same trail, but more than one time, and you go forward on it and then you go back the same way, you see things differently each time. You get a different perspective, whether you're going in the forward direction or the backward direction, or going forward, again. So there is definitely more information, more insight, more repair or whatever that can be done through that process of going over the same territory 3 times.
Yeah, definitely. I think you definitely get a different viewpoint and perspective. And so I really do like that metaphor. It really gives us, I think, a broader view of Mercury retrograde, rather than, okay, it's Mercury retrograde time and it's glitch time, and really understanding maybe that there's a reason behind the glitches, rather than it's just, random, issues that are happening to you. So you said that it happens 3 times a year. So when are the next couple of retrogrades going to
Oh
be
gosh,
happening?
I don't have the dates in front of me. I think the next one is in May, and then there's one in the fall sometime, but I don't have the dates in front of me. But if people would like to sign up for my newsletter, I always talk about Mercury Retrograde when it's coming up. In my newsletter, I have a newsletter that comes out twice a month on the new moon and the full moon. So next week we have a full moon, so it'll be coming out next week. And people could sign up for the newsletter on my website, and that's www.sajit.net. And Sajit is spelled S-A-J-I-T.
So yeah, so tell us ways that people can get in touch with you and a little bit about the services that you offer.
Thanks, Jennifer. So certainly you can contact me through my website. You can sign up for the newsletter there. You can send me an email through my website. You can come and take a look around and see the different services. I offer astrology consultations, like as a standalone service, just purely astrology. And then I also offer coaching packages, which are a combination of astrology with a really deep kind of process work. So the thing about astrology is that it's really interesting and insightful information, but information alone doesn't necessarily help people go through a transformation and make changes and really move forward with their life purpose and their soul calling. So that's what the coaching does, is it really helps to let go of the old patterns that are creating inner obstacles and begin to move forward towards your highest potential. And I also am on Facebook, both under my name. I've got my personal page under my name. And I also have a business page that's Sajit-Soul Guidance. And of course, I'm also on Google+, both under my own name as well as under Soul Guidance.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sajid, for being on the show. And is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners today before we close out?
Just if there are glitches today, if it's not really time to quite move forward yet, really breathe. You know, just really breathe, let go, laugh, and know that you will be able to move forward in the days to come.
Great. Thank you so much, Sajid, for being on the show today. The Spiritual Spectra Talk Show is all about emotional, physical, and spiritual wellness, promoting it and giving you ways to deal with it. And you can contact the Spiritual Spectra Talk Show on our website, spiritualspectratalkshow.com, if you'd like to know about upcoming episodes. And if you would like to know about me, I'm Jennifer Garcia, owner of Spiritual Spectra. I'm a certified energy healer and psychic medium, and you can reach me through my website, spiritualspectra.com. My email is info@spiritualspectra.com. I'm located in Maryland, but I also offer my services through the internet worldwide. And I look forward to the next one, and I'm sure you do too.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.